Great. We are live. It looks like, from what I can see, the number of people who are currently joining us. And thank you for being in the waiting room while we were in our practice session. And I'm very excited today to take you into a conversation about healthcare with three top operators, thinkers, architects of the narrative around healthcare and AI. And I guess the purpose of today is really to learn what we maybe do not know about the advances that are currently unfolding in the industry. I'm supported with three amazing speakers. So first of all, my colleague Paola Rodriguez, who is also at micro1. She's leading our medical research. And Paola, I know you're connecting from Argentina, so welcome to the forum. The first time that we're doing this together, right? So first time that we have a chance to work together. And welcome, David Sun. David, you are calling from San Francisco. You are working in a company called A Sleep, and we'll try to find more about the work you guys are doing, which is just in my preliminary research, fascinating and impacting so many aspects, right, of the new wave of healthcare that we see and shifting into advanced analytics, right, to understand, I think, sleep as an input of sleep, among the other things, and the biometry they are coming with that. And Sam Hashemi, who is connecting from Vancouver, my beloved Canada, where I'm originally from, is actually working for Prenuvo. And Prenuvo, if I understand correctly, Sam, does a lot of different work in terms of scanning as well. And so there is, again, another area where I love to learn more from you. Look, this is, as I mentioned before, very casual, is a conversation more than anything else. If that's okay, Paul, I'm going to start from you. I know that you are a medical doctor, but you also have a passion about technology and AI. So you have an incredibly interesting profile. Look, you joined micro1 as the director of medical research. You've been probably working with tons of experts that you've been training, onboarding. Tell us a bit more about your journey on how you were finding this link between medicine and technology. I think it would really be a great opening for many people that are trying to think, are they convergent? And in your specific case, they are convergent. And very nice to have you as part of this. Paula.
Thank you so much. I actually love this question. I get asked it a lot. I would say it's a very common question, to be honest. What do they have to do, right? Why would you do computer engineering and medicine? Do they even mix together? And I always love to reply how honestly everything that happens within the artificial intelligence space came out of the pure love and inspiration of the human physiology. Okay, even the terms, all of the beginning, all of the origins is just a full-on domain of science trying to, I would say, maybe imitate what is happening within our bodies. When you talk about neural networks, they come about the way that we have synapses inside our brains. Or when you talk about, well, when it comes to machine learning and you're trying to identify patterns, it's the same way, or trying to imitate the same way that humans actually do learn when they're coming from a very young age to adulthood. So they're so strictly related. I would say they one fits into the other. I would say biology is the beginning of where it all started, of course, and artificial intelligence, just like the name is saying, it comes from the human intelligence, and it's just trying to feed into that, into what that perfect machine that we see every day, which are humans, how they learn, how they live, how they identify patterns, how they think, and they try to simulate that and translate it into other areas to help facilitate life. So I would say they're more related than you think, because without study of human biology and physiology, we would not have any of the advancements that we do have right now in technology. I believe one comes out of the other.
Well, fascinating. Well, Paul, like, look, if I was looking for an opening, I don't think I could have any better opening than this one. And I'm really happy that you shared this with us, because beside being part of your personal journey, I think is also speaking highly about what is happening in the industry, in what I was mentioned before, this convergence that you guys are pioneering. likely you are creating the space for more people in the future to continue to explore. But very happy that you set us up somehow with this context. I'd love to go to Sam this time, right? And Sam, look, the reason why I'd like to go to you next is like, if I understand correctly from my kind of my homework, Prenuvo is a company that probably has the largest normative data set on the whole body MRI scans, which basically is covering asymptomatic individuals, if I have said that correctly, right? Um, the reason why this is interesting, not in terms of just the size of the data set, but I think it's more about the paradigm shift that you guys are bringing forward. Is almost like changing the idea of what medicine is all about, right? Because I think many people, if we use the sick care conversation, right, they go or they approach themselves to a medical conversation when they feel that their system, right, is in a crisis. You're operating from a very different paradigm. So look, as you're telling your story, because I always like to know who is the person behind, nonetheless, the job, right? Tell us also where you see this paradigm having been shifted and whether you were kind of participating to something you noticed was already happening, or whether you think you are contributing to create this new sense of healthcare, which is very different from how generations of people have been exposed. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you. Um, I think that that's a really interesting perspective to have about this proactive healthcare domain. The healthcare, or what we call sick care these days, have been historically focused on pathologies. We have a patient, it's sick, let's design the best drug, let's design the best treatment for it. And the whole focus is on disease and pathology. Now we have this new perspective, which is looking for the definition of the normal, quote unquote,
Mhm,
what normal means. Um, in a traditional healthcare system, people have to wait until they have some symptoms under their skin, then they go and meet a doctor to take care of that condition. And unfortunately, in many cases, they get to the specialist too late. But having that asymptomatic data set is helping us to define what's normal for a specific age, gender, and also ethnicity. We have done several studies, probably more than 50 publications, on looking at how different organs in body are changing. And we came up with this magic number, which does the work, is not super accurate, but does the work. That things in our body are changing 4% per decade. Like the brain shrinks 4% per decade. The prostate grows 4%
mhm,
per decade. The ovaries shrink with the
mhm,
same ratio.
mhm,
Endometrium thickness, fibrogranule of tissue of the breast to fat. So the body is not a static state, it's changing. So what
mhm,
it means if my body of my brain is changing faster than 4%, it means that
mhm,
something is coming down the road that I'm not aware of it right now, but it's going to hit me in 5 years, 10 years. Alzheimer's disease, most of the cancers, they take 5 to 11 years to show up under the skin. And now we know that the best medicine is early detection.
mhm.
So this new paradigm is saying, okay, here is what normal looks like for you. And if there is a deviation, let's take care of it now before we pass the no return kind of signal.
Yeah. Well, Sam, look, I first of all, I have to say, just by listening to this, it's so profound to consider that we're talking about this and what impact can we have in improving not only life expectancy but quality of life for millions if not billions of people. And I think after so long where technology was exclusively perceived as an efficiency enabler, right? We are placing the efficiency where it should be, which is on things that matter for us, right? And I find this to fascinating in a way that sometimes we talk about almost like this agnostic system they're operating and talking how fast they go and how efficient they are and what they capture. But when I have conversation like this, it's not just necessarily a ratio that gets improved, it's really people's quality of life. And I find this to be, as I mentioned, profound. Thank you for this, Sam. I really appreciate that. And look, both you, Paul, and Sam helped me to define this, right? David, your work with A Sleep is critical because not only I think your company, for what I understood, does capture so many different kind of indicator that we can determine through sleep, but actually I think if I understand this correctly, it's not just a measurement passively, there is also an active function that comes from measurement. The fact that we don't only say, this is my heart rate variability, that there is a way for us to act upon that. And I think A-Sleep is unique in this sense, right? Is a company that, and we need to differentiate in relationship to what you guys do. So similar to the question I asked to Paula and Sam, tell me more about you. I know there's been Apple in your life in the past, right? There've been other companies, but what have brought you to where you are right now as a person, as David? And also tell me more about where you see Sleep as a company contributing to this conversation of turning monitoring healthcare from passive to active, which is, I think, again, is a paradigm shift. Many people will think it's enough to know how many hours I slept, right? But there is probably where we want to go next. So, David, over to you.
Yeah. So where I came from and where A-Sleep is headed with all the health AI, um, brilliant. I think so. I myself, before A-Sleep, I joined in the summer of last year when we raised a major funding round in this pivot towards health AI. Before that, I led an applied research at Apple, mainly focused on natural language systems. Started almost 8 years ago when language modeling was still small language models, and LM came around and everything was moving super fast. What really attracted me to A-Sleep is its vision and fertile ground for doing something really impactful to personal health. A-Sleep has been founded in early 2014, and we have to date hundreds of thousands of customers over the years and almost 1 billion hours of sleep biometrics data of multiple modalities and generations across a very diverse spectrum of demographics. And with the health AI and the broader AML team we're starting, I think the vision is really about making this preventive health available to a broad set of population and to have the touch points and high frequency and to generate all the insights there to really, to Sam's point, is early detection, right? And not
Mhm.
just disease early detection, but overall wellness early detection. And I think this is kind of truly the vision our founders had at the very beginning. Well, I mean, there's the very basics of sleep taking a third of our lives. If you're sleeping 8 hours a day and try to stick to that healthy habit, and so much potential and importance in improving that. And our biggest actuations are through sound mechanical contour of the surface of the bed for snoring mitigation, and then the biggest impact with educations, actuations in temperature regulation to help with the cooling of the core body temperature, the circadian rhythm and the cycles, as well as the coolness to help prevent inflammation and the body recovery during deep sleep phase. So there's a multitude of things we help to proactively optimize for sleep, but also the promise of this health AI leveraging massive amounts of data to build foundation models to help with disease understanding and biological aging. And that's kind of where we're headed in this moment. Yeah.
Wow. David, if I can actually ask you kind of a follow-up on this, because I think it nicely follows, right, your thinking about 1 billion hours of data being collected, right? I think in terms of research on sleep is unprecedented, right? Is there anything that has surprised you guys, right? That maybe we would never be able to find out, considering that the sample of any kind of research lab will never be so big. So tell us that anything that comes to your mind, right? That with that size of data set, right? As truly being, wow, this is a conversation that we were not expecting, or this is an information we didn't know. Anything. It can be as trivial and as deep as you want it to be.
Yeah. I probably touch on two things on the foundation model front, leveraging 1 billion hours of data. One is on biological aging. This was
Mhm.
something that was published in Nature with Apple's PPGH using wrist wearables. And we
Mhm.
have a different modality is ballistic cardiography, which is the mechanical movements and oscillation of the body with the pump of the heart alongside the response from the blood vessels and the overall body. Um,
Mhm.
when we build a representation of human physiology on the waveform of that oscillation driven by the cardio activities, we're able to actually predict biological aging
Mhm.
within one of the highest precision values in the field. This is active work, and we're submitting to NeurIPS later this year. So I can tell you is that it's almost magical if you lie on the bed for a couple of minutes or 60 seconds, we're able to tell how old you are. And if you're healthy, that age would be very much close to your actual age on the passport or whatever. And if there's a delta, it's very indicative of your aging processes.
Mhm.
And another fun story is when I believe you probably know about the rescued pilot story in the Middle East. And there was a news, I don't know if it's true or not, of an skunkworks product called Ghost to Murmur. That they
Mhm.
were using some quantum physics and oscillation detection to locate the pilot's heartbeat in a vast area. Now, I think there's definitely a possible PR and misleading news to help with the broader strategy of the operation. But scientifically, the heart beat itself, captured in BCG form or PPG form, entails so much information about a person. When you train on 1 billion hours of data, we actually can tell who's who just by looking at the morphology of that wave. And I think this is where, when you have access to the data empowered by the latest model architecture to do amazing
Mhm.
things that will help humanity, will help with health in unthinkable ways previously. Yeah.
Wow. Well, David, look, I'm happy. First, I'm happy I asked you that question, and I'm fascinated, right, about what is ahead of us. It doesn't happen all the time these days that we always get fascinated about what's ahead of us. But I think in this case we are. And look, I'm going to try to create a bit of a tandem over to you now, Sam, before going back to Paula, right? Asking kind of change a little bit more the direction of our conversation on the data set, right? Sam, Peru is another company that, again, is impressive the work you guys are doing. What is interesting about Peru is that because you guys are fundamentally working with asymptomatic populations, your clinical data set is different from the traditional data set, right? We tend to basically collect data set when people are they're manifesting symptoms or they might be unwell already. And so the question is, what is that you guys have been able to see, similar to the conversation about sleep that David was able to help us, right? That traditional medicine cannot see, considering, I would say, the almost like the semantic difference in the data set that we're using to come up with our conclusions. So how different would that information be when you're looking at merely healthy individuals? So again, anything you can share with us, Sam?
Um, for sure. I think um, it goes back to that kind of the definition of the normal and the
Hmm.
correlation with lifestyle factors. I think I'm gonna do a detour here, then I'm gonna come back to your question. I think
Yes.
one of the greatest things that proactive care is offering patients is agency.
Hmm.
Now patients have agency over their choices to stay healthier rather than just be in the dark until something happens. And we know that the majority of this kind of solution surface for proactive care is in lifestyle choices, sleep, workout, and diet. And sleep, back to David's workout, sleep is the most important one. If you want to improve one thing and to improve your overall health, sleep is the one that you have to start in. So, kind of coming back to your questions, we started looking at correlations, how things
Hmm.
are working in relevance to each other, and
Hmm.
how different organs are working with each other, and how different lifestyles are impacting different conditions and pathologies, and also the aging process. very, very interesting outcomes that we have published in Aging and Disease in Nature last year, mostly about these correlations. Let's say few extra pounds of visceral fat, which is the fat around your internal organs, can cause your brain to have lower volume. That has a high association between your
Wow.
visceral fat and your brain volume. There are associations with your sleep and brain volume. There are associations with sleep and your visceral fat and metabolic disorder. And there are all
Hmm.
this fascinating information. There was a study, I think, a few years ago from Deloitte and Microsoft together on few hospitals that the outcome was that less than 3% of the hospital data are actually being processed to cure patients. So we have
Wow.
this 97% of the data inside the healthcare system and also in this proactive system that we are collecting that we are not actually looking into. How your
Hmm.
sleep can kind of impact your overall health. And I think that's my duty and David's duty to kind of measure these things and let patients know if you want to your brain age to drop by 5 years, here are the things that you can control. Here are your sleep, here's your diet change, here's your lifestyle factors that you can control, and kind of bring
Hmm.
that agency to the patients. Going back to the question again, there are a ton of very, very fascinating correlations between lifestyle choices, the aging process of different organs, and also this interrelationship of different organs. One of the papers that we published, I think last year at RSNA, was the correlation of metabolic disorders and diabetes and brain volume again.
Hmm.
And in a control study,
Wow.
we realized even when you control for visceral fat and subcutaneous fat, still patients with diabetes have a smaller brain. So that's a covariate for studying AD and MCI and trying to help patients with early Alzheimer's disease. So I think my overall answer would be there's that 95% of information that as a healthcare system we haven't been using yet. And
Yeah.
now we are kind of digging into it, measuring how things are impacting each other to bring more useful information both for patients and practitioners.
You know, Sam and David, before I go over to Paula, it's like for the conversation that we're having, we cannot come back, right? We only can go forward, right? I can imagine we have at one point in time almost like 200 people live watching us talk, and I can imagine how many of them are currently having questions in their mind about how can they really take advantage of this wave of I think is shifting the paradigm in understanding how much power we have in controlling our life, right? And data is an incredible tool for this. So this was look fascinating, and I'm going to bring it over to you, Paula, because okay, you have both the technical background, you have the medical background, but you're also helping to train lots of people to basically build the medical research micro1. Now, data is important. I think David and Sam taught us something fundamental that we knew, but I think we knew it now with even more compelling arguments, right? Is that data is really what determines a good healthcare strategy from an accidental one, right? That sometimes doesn't work because we don't have the information. Now, when you're trying to translate this in training people, and basically trying to bring both the data reasoning and the clinical reasoning into AI, right? What are the things that sometimes don't work? What are the things that sometimes is difficult to capture in at the level of human judgment? Because I think one of the things you have never discounted, Paolo, is that you believe that human oversight, the human judgment are important. But sometimes when we're dealing with this so many different factors, right? And you're training people to basically annotate or to basically build human data infrastructure, you find that clearly there must be something that is not as immediately one-to-one in the translation. So help us understand that part of your work.
Um, that's one I would say it's one of the most fun parts of this work because it really captures the essence of how beautifully complex human expertise is, right? So I would say that the core challenge here, with clinical expertise more specifically, is just not explicit knowledge, but it's compressing the judgment that it's being built over time by these experts, right? In the medical field, there's a lot of ambiguity every single time that a decision has to be made. It's not binary. So that chain of thought, capturing that and translating it, it's just like I said, it doesn't map really one-to-one on a label or an annotation. I would
Mhm.
say that when clinicians make decisions, they really don't follow a linear checklist as you would implement normally on a system, right? They integrate incomplete data and fill out gaps all the time with
Mhm.
expertise, previous knowledge in the human body. I would say 2 plus 2 is very rarely 4. So you have to translate this weighting of the risks and this ambiguity and this I would say pattern identification into applying context that it's usually not written elsewhere, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of reasoning is tacit, but it's not really explicit. That's a gap, right? And that's
Mhm.
we need to find the way on how we translate that and transfer that information into something that could be objectively gradable, right? Something that could be objectively considered as the right response. I would say that most annotation systems are fundamentally mismatching that because I would say that when you try to map complex reasoning into a discrete label or a single correct answer, that really strips away what we were saying at the beginning, the beautifully complex chain of thought that a human would do. And that would, take a lot of another issues like mistrust and missing judgment at the moment of the response. And in healthcare, it's not only being right, it's also being safe because
Mhm.
you are producing data that it's in a medical field or in the healthcare department, you're inherently, even if it's indirectly, you're providing a level of care. So when we do the mapping of the chain of thought, I would say we have 4 core things that are the hardest to map, which are uncertainty. As I said, 2
Mhm.
plus 2 is rarely 4. So we need to be able to catch up on that and be able to provide alternative routes based on the human expertise that is supporting that statement. We have the trade-offs, right? Which risks are being balanced out, like what is not providing a harmful response, what is something that could not impose any additional risks if it's present versus what is a non-negotiable to abstain from, right? Then we have the
Mhm.
restriction, which is connected to that trade-off. When is the right thing to not act or to overact, right? Because it's the same thing. Too much information is risky, but no information could also be risky as well. We always need to be aware on that harmful context around it, right? And then that's when it comes to the contextual overrides, right? It's all
Mhm.
connected, you can see. Because when guidelines don't apply clearly to a patient in front of you or to a query in front of you, then what routes should you take? What is the best approach here? So I would say that the real work around there, having walked
Mhm.
you through, the gaps and the challenges that we constantly face, I would say that it's actually building a system that can externalize the reasoning without oversimplifying it. Trying
Mhm.
to, again, simulate in a level of way that chain of thought, that kind of reasoning, similar to how a doctor, when they see a patient in front of them, sometimes they're coming out of a book. They're exactly described as you studied them a few years back, but then
Mhm.
something is mismatching, and that's when you start kind of thinking about previous patterns that you have seen in the past and kind of like all of the information bank that you have in your brain, trying to scavenge hunt the answer and what could possibly be in front of you. It's translating that chain of thought, that reasoning, that leverage that you have with all of these compiled patterns and information that you have, and be able to
Mhm.
identify when to bring it up front versus when to try to stay a little bit more attached to the regular set in stone guidance, I would say. And that's what I would call it, not oversimplify an answer, trying to always be able to navigate. It's never binary, to be honest. You always need to be able to navigate out of all of these information bank, trying to find a structured rationale that could contrast an expert's perspective. And that is
Mm,
coming from all of the human expertise and all of these experiences that can be brought into this data. Because honestly, AI is only as strong as the humans behind it. And that's
that's right.
the only way that we are able to lower down and close up this gap and these challenges that I just described.
Paula, just to close on this, and which was also one thing I wanted to ask you, right? Before I go to my probably last round of question to Sam and David. So, given everything you said, where do you think that we have the highest chance to close the gap? Is it basically in terms of increasing the trust, right? Is it in increasing the technology or the literacy for people that have the knowledge so that they can understand the data the same way companies like Sleep and Prenuvo are generating? Do you find that there's the right things to do where we are increasing the amount of confidence people have in using the technology coming from a point of expertise? So is that where you would imagine our trust contract can be somehow consolidated? That's what was emerging a little bit from what you were saying, but I don't want to paraphrase something unless I ask you directly.
Well, that's also a very good point because there is a lot of mistrust around it. And I would say one of the main sources of this mistrust is that when a model fails, it does so confidently. Like it fails
Mhm,
confidently. You cannot see or sense the doubt behind the model when it's providing a response, right? There's a lot of responsibility that needs to be considered when you have a model that is user facing and it's providing responses all the time. And that's where the mistrust, I believe, most of it is coming from. What I would say would close this gap and what is being applied in at least very specifically this domain is human oversight, right?
mhm,
When we talk about human oversight, there is this misconception that it is, or well, it's very frequently talked about as a safety net rather than a part of the actual infrastructure, which in healthcare, that's the case. It is a part of the actual infrastructure. So at its best, I would say that human oversight isn't just layered after the fact, but it's very, very into the beginning of the whole process, directly tied where decisions are fragile. That's where
mhm.
uncertainty it's most prominent at, right? That's where human oversight should be the
Yeah,
most closely tied to it. That's where really the context matters and where the cost of being wrong is real and severe because you could cause harm. that's
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 right.
something that we always have to keep in mind when we are mixing technology with healthcare, that while we're making it more accessible to people, and that's amazing, it could also cause harm. So that's
Yeah.
why in practice, I would say that that should translate to the clinicians not only reviewing the outputs, but also the thought process, because it needs to be as closely related to how they would actually treat a patient as possible.
Mm,
And that what I believe is what meaningfully would change the outcome, not a surface level of QA, which I believe that's where many companies are falling short, having the
yeah.
human oversight as a QA layer after the fact, just evaluating outputs, reviewing it, offering some kind of grading system after this. Instead, but safety and the actual expertise is not a checkbox and it's not QA. It's inherently one of the core pieces of the whole system. And I
Yeah.
believe that mm, kind of normalizing that
Hmm.
it's not humans versus machines, but actually coupling them both together to make each other better and make each other more reliable,
Hmm.
and pushing that front of the human oversight within the core nature of a system. I believe that's the way that you can successfully diminish the gap as much as possible.
Yeah, Paul, fascinating. Look, I also realize this is our conversation we could entertain for so much longer, right? 'Cause they need to have this vocalization, as you mentioned, and I appreciate that, especially because in your case is also coming from your point of legitimacy, both as as a technologist, as a medical doctor. And I find this to be so beautiful to listen. But I want to bring that very same conversation more in practice to you, Sam. So at Prenuvo, you guys have radiologists. They're working with you, right? I think in my preliminary research, at least 100 radiologists who are currently part of the organization, if not more. My question is, I guess their time allocation went from lengthy to shorter now. They can do much more basically with their time because they can look at data that would take longer before for them to access it at all, right? How has that changed their job in many ways? And the reason I want to ask you some about radiologists that there's always been this story for many years about what AI will eventually do to our jobs. And we're learning, right, that the interpretation might have been different from the reality where, yeah, technology does help, but it's not that suddenly we don't need people anymore. I think Paula's argument is in favor of the right level of balance in the upper side. Your experience is that you're making radiologists better what they do, but there is a change in the way they allocate time. What has been the journey for people working in the field when technology becomes part of their life?
I think this is a really interesting question. And as an AI person, I have to say I'm a little bit more conservative than Paula about
Mhm.
this integration. And I'm gonna explain why and how and what are my fears and the hopes that I have for AI in healthcare. I think going back to your quote about the godfather of AI, Jeff Hinton, going to RSNA in 2016 and telling radiologists in 5 years you're not gonna have a job. Um, 10 years passed, that didn't happen. I think this is a heads up call for my peers, for AI people, that they assume physicians are just a decision tree and we can just replace them with another decision tree, artificial decision tree. I think that's oversimplification of healthcare and practitioners. And very simple example is that when you go to your family doctor, as soon as you enter the room, they're watching you, they're
Mhm.
observing you, how you walk, how you sit, how you present yourself. They're watching all these elements outside of those couple of symptoms and QAs. AI is amazing. I've been in this for 15 years prior to the hype, and it's going to change everything. But we have to realize and we have to be kind of realistic about what it can do. In computer vision, AI sees things, tell things, and radiologists have the opportunity to accept or reject. LLMs, they're just predicting the next token. We can call them reasoning or chain of thought, but that's not actual reasoning or actual chain of thought. There are differences. Developing more than 140 models in the past 7, 8 years for practitioners, for patients, I can tell you that most of the AI, they're not failing anymore on performance. They're failing in the last mile, which is creating trust with physicians, which is on the compliance part, which is in the integration into the workflow and the ownership.
Mhm.
Computer vision is not as progressed as LLMs, but it produces more explainability for what it sees. But still, there are risks on both sides, undercalling or overcalling. What if AI undercalls things and physicians rely on that? What if AI overcall things and physicians start to rely on that and creates kind of biases in what they do? And I think everybody has seen that paper that came out last year from MIT that over 95% of AI pilots, they don't end up in production. I would bet in healthcare that's even worse. It's like few percent. And this is the biggest challenge that I'm focusing these days on, the AI adoption. This is a probabilistic piece of software, and we
Mhm.
are entering it in a clinical workflow, in a patient management system. Users don't know how to handle it. And I think as a community, we haven't solved the big problem of adoption yet. To
Yeah.
find the
Yeah.
right way of embedding these models, these strong models that they have really strong evidence into the workflows. My
Mhm.
prediction is that it's gonna overhaul lots of workflows because of these probabilistic natures. But as AI is getting better, our main concern is not AI performance anymore. It's that option and how we can bring this and create trust and put it in the right, plug it in the right place in the workflow
Mhm.
system. So that's why I have lots of battle scars, it's like, that I can
Yeah.
share, that why some models are being picked up by physicians, and they, if for any reason the model is down for a day or two, they would complain, and why some great models with great performance numbers are not well accepted by physicians or radiologists. So it's
Mhm.
something that we need to solve as a community. I think I don't have a clear answer. I can tell you the statistics says we are below 5% in adoption, and we have to do
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. So some of the most serious conversation with people who are so advanced somehow in the testing of hypotheses, right, across the industry, like you guys are exactly the ones where we see the limitation of how quickly we can adopt, because the world is not just a reflection of what we think always, right? As Paula was saying before, this nonlinearity is something that we have to constantly deal with. And while humans are naturally designed for this, the moment that we're increasing the efficiency of a given process, it doesn't mean that it will automatically become an adopted, right, norm. And I find this to be fascinating. Even the story you were telling before about the correlations, even if we have correlation, we need to see what will be the actionability around this correlation, right? And I think this is why the companies you guys are working for are so important, because they're opening the space for even more people to talk about this. So again, I really appreciated that as you were talking, a participant just made a comment that appreciated your insights. So thank you for this. And as I know we're not too far from wrapping this up, there's a question that came from Umer about the impact of sleep and how it will fundamentally change healthcare. And I'll try to rephrase it slightly different for you, David, because I think to the point that Umer was making, it is becoming clearer and clearer that sleep is a critical factor of people health and well-being. But what I find it fascinating is what you guys are doing at Asleep. If I read it correctly, you're trying to build an agent, a digital twin on our basically sleep physiology. And look, when we talk about digital twins in architecture, people understand it, right? If I talk about digital twins of a physical structure, people equally understand it. So the idea that we can use technology to visualize more complex structures and do simulations. But what is the digital twins of our sleep physiology, right? Considering what you guys were sharing with me before, the fact that there is this increasing amount of transformation in our lifetime, right? So tell us more about this. I read correctly about a sleep move in that direction with an agent. I think it's a fascinating way to think about where the application of some of this practice you guys are pioneering likely will become visible. So, David, over to you.
Yeah. Um, I think there's an interplay of two things. One is the importance of sleep and how we measure it. I mentioned a biological aging model, and typically, if you look at the players who are in the market that do biological aging, very few of them do it on the actual physiological signals alone. We're among probably the three or less players in the market that do it at the precision and accuracy we're at today. When you take the model, usually you sample over prolonged periods in a month and take an average. But if you apply it slightly differently, in the first hour of the sleep and the first hour in the
Mhm.
morning after they wake up, what you're able to see is a strong um, relationship between the percent of the deep sleep they have experienced and the recovery and HRV, and two, the delta in the biological age measured, right? So if there
Mhm.
is a pair of eyes looking at the physiology and say how old the person is, you literally are about a year younger after a night well rested compared to a night of poor sleep. And we
Mhm.
have been doing a lot of the optimization algo development in that area to promote the sleep with minimal effort on the individual user. Um, but this also backs into the second part of that agent, and this is done by an agentic workflow for optimization, taking in a lot of contextual data, unstructured, in understanding what happened during the day before the night. And that's our sleep agent for optimization. The second
Mhm.
part of digital twin is this long-term view.
Mhm.
Essentially, if you look at this longitudinal and higher frequency sampling of their lifestyles, the habits, physiological evolutions, and then aging over a longer period, you have a very clear picture on all those different factors impacting their aging, longevity, and health processes, and even to an extent disease risks, right? And measuring the sleep and biometrics for on a stable platform for long periods is known to actually give very accurate predictions on a variety of disease risks. There was a paper called Sleep Foundation Model that was in Nature Communications, and we were able to predict over 130 conditions and disease onset risks on one night of sleep data alone. And we have the first author of that paper on the team right now. That's why I said we, but the work was done back at Stanford a year ago. There's really a lot of potential in building that experiences. And I think the essence of health AI and the accessibility of those things kind of always brings me back to this story of someone I met when I interview candidates for schools. I sat on the Penn's alumni admissions office, and there was a high school student who ran a cancer screening clinic, a mobile cancer screening clinic for the nomad herders in Central
Mhm.
Asia. And after
Mhm.
doing some research on oncology and the public health, and then she said basically 50% or more of the diagnosed patients, if they were diagnosed even 3 or 6 months earlier, could have been saved. Um,
Well,
but the accessibility to screening, to diagnosis, and accessibility was real blocker for somebody to travel hundreds of miles on a horse and then a wagon and a different transport to the capital city to get screened. Often when they do that, they're already experiencing pain. And I think the real vision here on building the digital twin to do simulation and the forecasting on the health conditions is to bring that intelligence and high frequency and early diagnosis into the bed in the ambient way, and really
mhm.
to change the future of healthcare, hopefully from an after effect when things are wrong and perceived as pain, but into the premonition and ambient monitoring to help and track any of the trends before it become a concern and too late to change.
Yeah.
And that's
David,
digital twin.
I look again, thank you so much for this. I find it every time I ask a question, guys, and it's been true for the most of the forum that I've been running. I truly learn, right, from people who are operating at the level that I do not operate, and an industry where I'm just basically a user, right, or a consumer, as somebody who's trying to look after my health. Look, we come a time. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to engage further, but for those of you who are part of the experts in the Slack at the micro1, you have a way to keep on engaging with us, and we'll keep on try to engage with this. I hope David and Sam, because I know Paul is a colleague from micro1, it's not the last time that we're going to have a conversation. I would love to have even more. I'd love to continue to represent your papers if you guys are writing together to an audience that will constantly, I think, also help you shape your own thinking. There's been a question that was like floating around that we don't have full time for full attention on privacy, and I would imagine that on either FDA approval in your case, David, right, which I think is where you guys are going right now, right, or in your case, Sam, when you're dealing with data on condition that could be life-threatening, right, or in the work you're doing, Paula, right, with both as training the medical community at micro1, but the conversation that we're bringing forward. I guess this is a trade, not necessarily a trade, but a balance to find between where research and innovation goes versus privacy. And I know there are no easy answer for this, but I think, right, that once we're going to be able to kind of juggle and calibrate in the right way, we might be able to really find that the upside are largely outnumbering the downsides, right? Which I think is where the work you guys are doing is so important. So look, guys, respectful of time. I know we're still early in the week, and you guys are taking time away from everything that keeps you busy. I hope this is only the very beginning of a more conversation we can have on healthcare. So Paula, thank you very much for having, first of all, set a fantastic setting that helped me to facilitate the question with our guests and your co-authors in this case. And I'm very happy that you're part of micro1, and so we have ongoing opportunity to work together. So this is an honor to work with you. Sam, fascinating to find the work you guys are doing. The first thing I was thinking is like, I want to do all of this myself, right? I want to make sure that I scan. I have been doing scanning in South Korea on comprehensive scanning because I want to make sure that I can live long and a good quality of life, right? So that there is more contribution to be made. But it's also true many people are not exposed as I am, right, to the conversation like this. And so how do we, back to your point, Sam, create a wider adoption, especially for people that don't have our privileges? I think this is so important, right? It's almost a moral responsibility that we have. And David, look, fascinating. I have to tell you something because I am biased. When I am in class, I always say that the only superpower I have is sleep, right? If I can get my hours of sleep, is actually incredible how much I can do, right? And this is something that I was not really aware when I was younger. But age teaches you fundamental lessons in life. One thing I learned is that if I have my hours of sleep, I can climb mountains. If I don't have my hours of sleep, yeah, I'm nowhere to be found. So I'm happy that also your research is supported. And Sam, you equally said that out of the three major cluster, sleep, right, as the inference. Guys, thank you so much. I hope this is not the last time we have a conversation. I look forward to opportunity in the future to be in the same forum to talk together. But thank you for being part of this community. I'll do a follow-up with my reflection on this. There will be a recorded YouTube that if you guys want to share and promote with your network, it will be great. And look, thank you again. I am grateful for the time that we spent together. I wish you a great remainder of the day, wherever you are, and all the best from Mark. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.